On the Big Island of Hawaii, a mysterious bike accident leaves two puzzling crime scenes.
The amount of evidence is so minute.
Can Dr. Henry Lee find the killers before they strike again? Hawaii County Police were investigating the rape and murder of a young woman in the Puna district of the Big Island of Hawaii. But 3 years had passed before Dr. Henry Lee was brought in to review the evidence. Based on mathematical calculations of the damaged bike, the point of impact, and where all the evidence was found, investigators calculated that Dana Ireland had been hit from behind by a vehicle traveling at approximately 15 miles per hour. Dr. Lee and Captain Francis Rodillas drove to the second crime scene, a distance of about 5 miles. Using the diagram he had made at the time of the original investigation, Rodillas placed the evidence where he first found it.
And her shorts was found right here in this area, approximately, and the Jimmy Z t-shirt was found just approximately in that area there.
A female investigator was placed in the exact position in which Dana Ireland's body was found. The ground investigation was also picking up, starting with a phone call from out of the blue.
I get this call from Frank Pauline's half-brother wanting to disclose some information about Frank's involvement in this case.
Now that his brother had given him up, Frank Pauline started by admitting he'd lied to police when they questioned him 3 years earlier. Then he dropped a bombshell, telling police he was in the car that ran Dana Ireland down, and he wasn't alone.
They were in a Volkswagen belonging to Albert Schweitzer, and that they observed Dana Ireland riding her bicycle heading back towards Kapolei Drive. At that point, Albert Schweitzer yelled something out to her. She responded where Albert became angry, turned his Volkswagen around, eventually running her over.
Pauline's story was consistent with the evidence that suggested Ireland had been struck by a small Asian or European car. But in the 3 years since the murder of Dana Ireland, the Schweitzer's VW had been repainted yellow and was missing both of its fenders and most of the interior. Pressed for more information, Pauline told Captain Guillermo the rest of the chilling tale.
And he disclosed that they loaded her into the Volkswagen and transported her from there to the scene where she was eventually found. At that point, he indicated that only Albert Schweitzer had sexually assaulted her.
Meanwhile, Dr. Lee got to work. At his lab, Dr. Lee reviewed the evidence that Hilo police had collected years earlier. The first piece examined was the Jimmy Z t-shirt.
Her blood was found on the t-shirt. That's considered a direct linkage of victim's DNA to a suspect t-shirt.
Dr. Lee was able to find some small rust-like metallic particles in the torn jeans of Dana. And ultimately, he then was able to compare those rust fragments to a sample of rust fragments that had been located from Ian Schweitzer's car.
The rust fragments were consistent with the underside of the VW Bug, confirming Frank Pauline's statements that they had run over the victim at least once. Investigators looked for more physical evidence to strengthen their case. Ken Baker, accident reconstructionist, traveled to Hilo to match Dana Ireland's damaged bike to Albert Ian Schweitzer's VW Bug.
The scratch on the bumper was consistent with an impact with the right front fender of the striking vehicle. The height of the bumper was approximately 14 inches, and the height of the damage to the bicycle was approximately 14 inches. The matching of the two told us that at least the kind of vehicle we were looking for would be similar to an older model Volkswagen with a 4-inch bumper.
Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers were arrested for the murder of Dana Ireland. The prosecution's case was built one step at a time. The t-shirt, the VW, the bicycle, and Frank Pauline's initial confession.
Frank Pauline Jr. was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole for the murder, that he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the kidnapping and 20 years in prison for the sexual assault in the first degree. Albert Ian Schweitzer was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole for murder in the second degree, 20 years in prison for kidnapping, 20 years in prison for sexual assault in the first degree.
Sean Schweitzer, who was only 15 years old at the time of Dana Ireland's murder, agreed to a plea bargain and was sentenced to 1 year in prison and 5 years probation.
Years later, I'm standing in the same spot where she's staying. She probably look at the wave, think about life. The law enforcement tried to provide some solution to our society, to victims' family, and finally provide a solution and an answer for the case.